The word is pronounced Schadenfreude. It's a German word. It refers to that feeling of joy we experience at the misfortune of others. Like when you find out that someone you know was just turned down for a promotion and you secretly feel happy about it. Like when you find out that an acquaintance is having marital problems and you secretly feel a little joyful about it. Like when you find out that a website has been hacked and 37 million people have been exposed as cheaters and you secretly feel exhilarated. In case you're unaware, I'm referring to the website ashleymadison.com and to the scandal that has been playing across the news this entire week. This website, Ashley Madison, was created as a place where persons who wanted to have discreet extramarital affairs could connect with other married persons who were looking for the same. The site assured its subscribers that their liaisons would be kept secret and that their information would remain anonymous. Well, so much for that. A group of hackers broke into the Ashley Madison database last week and released the information of over 37 million paid subscribers. Let me repeat that statistic. 37 million. That is a staggering figure. I read this week that there were only 3 zip codes in the entire United States that were not represented in this Ashley Madison breach. Not area codes, zip codes. And just FYI, 40701 was not one of those 3. So it's right here at home. It's a huge scandal. It's epic, really, both in size and in scope. And let it not go unsaid, it is shameful. It is unequivocally, inexcusably shameful. But you want to know what else is shameful? Feeling a sense of thrill that it happened. Feeling a sense of superiority that your name is not on that list. You want to know how I know that? Because those very feelings were mine. Or how about this? News breaks Thursday morning, and we learn that a disgruntled former journalist has opened fire on a reporter and a cameraman on live television in Virginia. Then, just hours later, we learn that the gunman has faxed a 23-page letter to ABC citing racism and heterosexism and bureaucratic injustice among his reasons for the massacre. I don't suspect many of us felt Schadenfreude here. I doubt many of us felt misplaced joy or exhilaration upon this piece of news. But I'm willing to bet many of us felt Schadenfreude's cousin, self-righteous anger. I'm willing to bet that rather than be devastated, rather than sit quietly and fully absorb the pain and the darkness attending this tragedy, that instead many of us seized on this opportunity to immediately vent about gun control policy, or mental health issues, or race relations, or sexuality issues, and about how this event underscored all the reasons we happen to feel the way we do about these heated topics. I know we did this because I saw it. Saw it all over the news. Saw it all over Facebook. And make no mistake, this horrific nightmare warrants our anger. It warrants our unqualified, unmitigated anger. And make no further mistake, there is an enormous problem in our country with gun violence. Just as there is an enormous problem in our country surrounding mental health issues and race relations and issues of sexuality. This holds true no matter which side of these issues you happen to stand on politically, whether conservative or liberal, whether Republican or Democrat. A cool-headed examined look reveals there is enormous misunderstanding, there is an appalling lack of empathy, and there is a staggering unwillingness to consider complexity and nuance on these issues. Liberals are daily cast as naive and soft and elitist and unpatriotic. Conservatives are daily cast as hate-filled and selfish and greedy and unenlightened. Hear me. These are caricatures. And they're too easy. But the more we hear them, the more we mistake the simplicity of the caricature for the complexity of the real thing. And the less acquainted we become with the real thing, the further detached we grow from reality. And do you want to know why I bring all this up this morning? Why I bring up the Schadenfreude about Ashley Madison, why I bring up the self-righteous anger about the Virginia shooting, why I bring up our preference for caricature rather than complexity. It's because among all the voices I hear on these things, and I hear so many, I haven't heard a single one of them saying, I am part of the problem. So right here, right from this very pulpit right now, hear me say this. I am part of the problem. I may not have any connection to the Ashley Madison scandal. I may live some 200 miles from Virginia, but I assure you I am part of the problem. Because the truth is this. We live in a broken world full of broken systems, and we are all broken individuals. We hear virtually every day about shootings and terrorism and poverty and trafficking and evils more heinous than any horror film could ever do justice to. And we scratch our heads and we wonder how it's possible. How could the world be so broken, we think? How could things be so unjust and so corrupt and so morally bankrupt? And we look out there for an answer, when all the while the answer is right here, right inside each and every one of us. Jesus is trying to impress this very thing on both the Pharisees and his disciples in our scripture lesson today. Here the Pharisees, who are known for priding themselves on their own righteousness, here they approach Jesus and they ask him why his disciples aren't following the same rules that they are. And Jesus, not being baited by their self-righteous smugness, he calls them hypocrites. And then he gathers everyone around him, both the Pharisees and his disciples, and he says to them all, "Listen and understand. It is from within, from inside the human heart, that evil comes." If you look at this passage closely, you see that Jesus is not only chastising the Pharisees here. He's talking to his disciples too. He's making certain that they not, upon hearing his rebuke of the Pharisees, become guilty of the very thing he's rebuking the Pharisees for, which is self-righteous sanctimony. He's saying, listen, this is not exclusive to the Pharisees or to the Sadducees or to the Romans or to anyone. He's saying, no, this is endemic to everyone, not least of all to those of you, my followers. And lest you realize it, you will go on blindly perpetuating the problem. So what is the problem? Let's call it what it is. Sin. We don't like that word these days. It's discordant to our 21st century ear. It has such ugly connotations. It seems so tied up with an overly pessimistic view of human nature. It just sounds so unenlightened. Sin. In fact, In the 20th century and through the turn, in the 19th century and through the turn of the 20th century, it had become a common assumption in theological circles that we could just jettison this talk of sin. What with the steady increase of modernity and the feverish pace of progress, many theologians and preachers taught that sin wasn't a condition innate in us, not something intrinsic to our human makeup. Instead, they taught, evil and badness were simply evidence of our historical limitation. In other words, evil and badness are produced because we don't yet know enough about ourselves and about our species and about the world we live in. But the more enlightened we continue to become, the further progress marches on, the less and less evil and trouble will plague us, until one day, in the not terribly far distant future, we will finally live harmoniously. We will live as one, as John Lennon famously imagined it for us sometime later. But then something happened that forced theologians and preachers to have to radically rethink this position. It was called the Holocaust. Right here in modern 1940s, in the enlightened 1940s, right in hyper-sophisticated Germany, no less, something happened that was so horrific, so appalling, that it couldn't just be ascribed to mere limitation. There was simply no other word for what was happening. It was evil. Consequently, the old Christian doctrine of sin came back to the fore, and people began rethinking whether we could just chalk sin up to something as simple as limitation. And I mention all this historical context so as to say this. Though there was a radical rethinking of sin in the 1940s, we are still very much products of Enlightenment-era theology. A theology that resists discussion of sin because sin seems so antiquated, so unsophisticated, so unenlightened, and, well, so uncomfortable. I myself was once very drawn to this conception of sin. Yes, I thought, modern theology is on to something here. It's not innate sinfulness that's the problem. It's the doctrine of sin itself. It produces in us shame and guilt and self-hatred that we otherwise wouldn't have. And so the farther we can get away from this negative assessment of ourselves, the freer we will be to love everyone and pursue goodness and experience joy. It's a captivating thought. We'd like it to be true. I'd still like it to be true. But it's not. And anyone willing to do true, honest self-introspection will quickly recognize this. Because if we search ourselves, if we stay awake to the thoughts and the instincts that cross our minds each moment, if we examine the closest contours of our inclinations, we find the same thing that theologians found with 1940s Germany. That existing quietly beneath that sophisticated external layer, deep down a dissonant force is at work. A force that is at once shockingly unpleasant and persistently unyielding. And that's the best word for it, a force. We don't want it. We don't generate it. It somehow just works upon us, in us. And this force is sin. Which is to say that sin is not a mere list of bad things we've done, not isolated mistakes here and there. Sin is a force all its own. Listen to what the 20th century theologian Paul Tillich says about it. Sin is more than the trespassing of a list of rules, Tillich writes. Sin dwells within us and makes us do what we don't want to do. The Apostle Paul speaks of sin in the singular with a capital S. Sin is a power that controls world and mind, persons and nations. So why do I preach on sin today, this uncomfortable topic that seems so outdated in contemporary culture? Here's why. Because until we come to a reckoning with sin's reality, until we put to bed our hopeful fantasies about our own intrinsic goodness, until we comprehend our own complicity in the world's corruption, then we're never going to be anything more than another screaming voice. We're never going to be anything more than another pointing finger. We're never going to be anything more than another part of the problem. In the 1920s, the London Times solicited essays from a number of popular authors on the topic, "What's Wrong with the World?" To which the acclaimed Christian writer and thinker G.K. Chesterton mailed in this thoughtful essay in response, quote, "Dear Sirs, I am, sincerely yours, G.K. Chesterton." Would that when a scandal like the Ashley Madison scandal occurs, or when a tragedy like the Virginia shooting occurs, or when another moment of negative cultural import occurs, and we find ourselves collectively compelled to ask, what is wrong with our world? Would in those moments that we be as clear thinking as G.K. Chesterton, that we could say, well, to start with, I am. Jesus tried to teach his disciples to do this, and we would do well to heed his instruction. It's not so much the things that are out there Jesus was trying to tell them, as it is these things that come from within here. And this is why the Apostle Paul writes to the church in Rome that they must be transformed by the renewing of their minds. You want to know when these words from Paul crossed my own mind? Just the other day. When I was sitting there patting myself on the back for not being someone given to something like ashleymadison.com. You hypocrite. I could hear Jesus saying, you hypocrite. Do you not also have flaws? Are you not also riddled with sin? And so I suddenly thought of this verse from Romans. And I prayed for the continued renewing of my mind. And I prayed that I might be transformed in my spirit. But then the shooting in Virginia happened. And I watched the news. And I looked at Facebook. And I saw all the usual hate. I saw all the usual finger pointing. I saw all the usual blame casting. I saw all that familiar caricaturing. And I suddenly felt this profound sense of self-righteousness. That here were these petty people who couldn't see the big picture, who were so caught up in finding fault that they couldn't work together to find solutions. When all of a sudden, I heard those words again. You hypocrite. You hypocrite. Are you not just like them? Here you are getting a quick high off of thinking you're somehow better than they are. And right then and there, a simple truth was impressed upon me all over again. And that is that the world has so many problems. And I am one of them. To know this fact, C.S. Lewis says, is the foundation of all clear thinking about ourselves and about the world we live in. And I think he's right. And I'd say we need clear thinking about ourselves and about our world perhaps now more than we ever have. because it is no exaggeration to say that both our country and the world are more polarized than we've ever been before. Do you agree? And the more we finger point, the more we assign blame, the more we caricature, the more polarized we will become. And until we reckon with the reality of our own sinfulness, the harder it will be to stop doing these things. Because schadenfreude feels good. Self-righteousness feels good. Sanctimony feels good. And being transformed doesn't. Being transformed hurts. Being transformed is humbling. But being transformed is the only way we will ever know substantive change. Because as Jesus says, it doesn't begin with those things out there. It begins with these things in here. So if we really want to address the problem, we have to go to the source of the problem. And the source of the problem is not Ashley Madison. The source of the problem is not the Virginia shooting. The source of the problem is not even gun violence or mental illness or race relations or any of the isms that daily divide us, as real and as devastating and as destructive as those things undoubtedly are. No, the source of the problem is much closer and much more inconspicuous than that. The source of the problem is me. And until we recognize that the problem is these things from within, we will never begin to change those things out there.